Hi, and welcome to the Brohoyo podcast, the podcast about gacha in general and Hoyoverse games in specific. I'm your host, Steven, and this is my co host, David.
Hey everyone.
And this week, we're going to go over the events of the 5.3 Archon Quest in Genshin Impact. So, as longtime followers of the show know, we usually give each other about a week and a half in order to complete the Archon Quest, since we're busy working adults and we can't necessarily sit down and just grind it all out in one evening. So give us a little bit of chance to play through it, enjoy it, have a little bit more leisurely and non-rushed playthrough of it so that we can enjoy the Archon and main quests of Genshin and Honkai Star Rail. So having gotten that done, we're back here to talk about it. And I guess, Dave, I'll toss it over to you. What are your general thoughts about the 5.3 quest?
So for the 5.3 Archon Quest, general thoughts. I wanted to just mention, I appreciate that I see we're getting some of the voice actors back. So there were more voice lines, but still missing out on a few. So some of the silence there for the English voice actors was it lessened from the experience a little bit. But if you change voice actors to a different language, perhaps you can still catch some of the emphasis and the feelings conveyed through the voices themselves. But for the story, I'm going to be honest. To me, this section of the story was extremely predictable and felt like a glorified walking simulator. And what I mean by that is, I felt all of kind of where the story was going, the foreshadowing we'd had from the previous Archon Quest, led us to this point where Malvika, used the power, so now she's gotta die type thing. But to me, as a player, I'm like, you're not going to kill off an Archon Malvika. They're like,
she's a playable character. She's not going to die.
There haven't been many characters that have died, and those that have, were not released playable characters. I don't think someone that was as hyped up by the community as Malvika to be playable, I don't think killing off that character would have the best reaction from a fan base who's putting her up on a pedestal. So I was like, so who's going to sub in for her? Who's going to fill in the death that's needed in this? And then even with the interlude between this Archon Quest and the previous one, when we were learning more about the captain, it just became more and more obvious. Okay, it's going to be him in some capacity. So when we ultimately got to the climax of the story where the death comes due, as it were, and obviously worth noting, spoilers for 30 seconds ago on out. But it should have been on. It should be pretty obvious there would be spoilers. Especially if you're familiar with our format. But anyway, so when that death came due at the very end after the big baddie fight, and he made his appearance, and then we actually learn exactly about his history as opposed to like hintings at it. While it was cool to learn about his history and see that, especially with our interactions with the Fatui and the Harbingers in the past, it was predictable that he was going to be filling in for Malvika in the role of the Knight of Death, or whatever the title of that particular deity was, filling in for Malvika. So, and then in terms of the walking simulator, I joke about that, but it was literally, walk and escort Kachina, and then walk around Mualas, or Mualal,
the village, and
the water village.
Yeah.
Walk around her village in preparation for the party. Walk back to the arena, and then you go with Malvika into the flames, and then you ride on Malvika's bike because we're showcasing Malvika. So I get it. We're showcasing her because they want to make you pull for her. That's fine. I didn't need that part of the quest to pull for her. I was already doing it, right? Yeah. They don't make bad Archons. So to use Steve's logic, and then you do a couple fights with Malvika. Again, we're showcasing her as a single use character, right? You're not in a party. It's literally just her. and then you flip to the traveler side, and again, you're just a traveler, you're not your own party, and then you walk to where the big bad is, and you fight an unlosable fight, and because it's unlosable, that justified them only letting you use the traveler, which was that's another thing I'm sure we're going to get into.
Oh yeah,
But that's what I mean by it was a predictable walking simulator. It's just a lot of walking, not too many puzzles, not a lot of um that was real combat, I would say.
yeah.
And then just kind of no big surprises to me in terms of lore and story reveals. But I've rambled on long enough. I'm sure I'll vent more later. But what about you, Steve? What were your initial impressions of the 5.3 quest?
Um, Very similar. I felt like the pacing overall for the Archon Quest was bad. Um, the as you mentioned, there wasn't. This was supposed to be the crescendo of the story, and it just fell flat. I'm not gonna lie, there were some great animations, some great moments. I'm easily emotionally manipulated, so I felt feelings during certain sections of the story. I got emotional, etc., etc., but that's not a very high bar. Like, it's very easy to manipulate me, to get me to feel the feels. I know that about myself. I'm willing to admit it. So them managing to do that wasn't meh. Like okay, you did it. Congratulations, but it didn't stick with me. There wasn't any. I feel like the most useful metric to apply to Natlans Archon Quest is comparisons to previous Archon Quests, and
Okay.
Fontaine didn't really work for me. I didn't hate it, but I lost the thread at certain points, and I think part of it was when they sent you to the underground base, I really resented the completely cutting you off from the map and locking you in there and having to play through that extended lockdown section. Sumeru, I was all in on. I really enjoyed Sumeru. The Endless 8 section, which was the time loop, was one that I was like, yes, cool, this is an interesting little gimmick. I was in on that. The ending to Sumeru was great. There were some lore bomb drops. That one also got me all teary-eyed with Nahida and her predecessor. So it's not like I'm sitting here going like, oh, Genshin just doesn't got it. It or at least, recently hasn't. The last two have been solid. My favorites, but, solid. And just Natlan in general feels like they didn't know what they wanted to do with it. Almost like they would have rather skipped over it and gone straight to Shneznaya. At least, and I don't want to do too much psychoanalyzing of the writers, but at least that's the way it felt to me, that there was a lot of decisions that I was kind of left scratching my head on. Maybe if you're playing through it like back to back to back to back to back, it'll like 5.0, 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, just all in one go. It will work better, like it'll feel more naturally paced and so forth. But I was really left after 5.2 kind of going like, okay, we've had the war, and now we're supposed to do this big fighting, going into the abyss and taking the fight to them, but that never really played out. Like, it was just a very basic domain mission. There wasn't the grand scale that we saw earlier. Like, I feel, and I don't want to go too deep into like, oh, well, here's how I would fix it, because that's easy to say after everything is done, and I don't have to worry about technical debt and all the other stuff that they have to worry about when they're developing these zones and so on. But I really feel like the zone would have benefited either from, or the story and Natlan in general would have benefited from either committing to the war idea, similar to Inazuma, where you show up on an island and you get to change and terraform that island by completing quests and so on and so forth, and just use that concept as Natlan retaking zones and areas. This way you get that sort of war feel of taking land and moving across a board. Or they should have not focused on war as war, and instead, we mentioned it way back, done a more like sports competition, something more loosey-goosey and lighter than what they went with, because at the moment it just didn't coalesce quite the way that I think they wanted it to. And again, now that I have rambled a little bit on it, let's, I guess, go into for a few of our more focused thoughts.
Sure. I mean, real quick, I do want to respond. There was one thing that you said that cracked me up, because you talked about is able to easily emotionally manipulate you, and you're very responsive to that. It's funny because I'm remembering back to our discussion about Arcane 2 when we talked about the little orphan girl perishing, and you were just a monster. You felt nothing. She was dead to you as soon as she made her appearance. Like, you knew she was gonna die, and you felt nothing when she did go. And then so it's just funny to see the two ends of the spectrum of what makes you emotional.
Like, okay, I do feel I have to defend myself.
So can you defend that position a little bit?
Yeah. So I guess here would be my thing. My problem with Arcane was they played their hand too well. Like, it was very obvious from the beginning what that character's role was in the story. So she was always a character tool, not like a character of her in her own right. Like, it was very clear that she existed in order to give Jinx someone to eventually lose and get sad over. Whereas, for example, Nahida in Sumeru was a character. Like, she had thoughts, goals, feelings. You interacted with her. She did things. You know, she didn't exist just to make another character have a storyline. You know, she was her own person. So forth. So
Okay.
there's that. You know, part of it I also think is just, for whatever reason, anime works on me. A lot of the old anime tropes will hit me right where they hit me in my 12-year-old self. Whereas, Arcane does, it somewhat uses those tropes, but it's not quite as bad about them. Like, if you show me a Vegeta AMV of him using his big Majin Vegeta suicide blast, I will get a little tear in my eye. Like, I will go, yeah, Vegeta, you're a real one. But again, that's a personal bias.
Fair enough. I just those two, points of view in isolated, vacuums, like, they can't exist without some type of context here. So there it is. Yeah. So moving on to the more finer points, where did you want to take it? Where did you want to jump to first?
So I guess one of the things I want to start with is, you mentioned it, the Trailblazer, or not the Trailblazer, the Traveler. We finally got our Pyro version of the Trailblazer. Mm-hmm. And I want to hear your thoughts on it before I start speaking on it. But what do you think of Pyro Trailblazer?
So, and correct me if I'm wrong on the timeline, but we literally get the Pyro abilities as we're about to fight the Big Bad.
Correct.
As I mentioned, we go through the walking simulator. Big Bad gets summoned, makes their appearance, and then magically we've unlocked Constellation 6 Pyro Trailblazer. Mm-hmm. And so it's a little jarring to have that thrown at you right before a big boss fight. And yes, you can go in and read the abilities, but that disrupts the flow of the story. Mm-hmm. Like, if I'm in the middle of the big boss fight, or the big boss fight is starting as I'm unlocking this, mm-hmm. if I want to actually understand how the character functions and how the character does, I am now pausing the game to read gameplay mechanics. Mm-hmm. And in your supposedly big emotional climax of this story arc, that is so, like, dissociating. Like, it just all the immersion that you had up to that point, if you did have any, gone. So the timing of it wasn't that great. And then the fact that you are forced to fight then the Big Bad with her and only her, and I think maybe eventually you get Malvika, and so you can alternate between the two units. It's still a little disjointed, because again, you've just been introduced to Malvika as a playable character not 5 minutes before, so you don't really know her kit, or if you do, you again, same issue, had to stop the story, read her kit to understand how she plays, because you fight, like, not bosses, but you fight some normal creeps in the previous section. So again, you're stopping the immersion there to read what she does, and then boom, Big Bad, same thing. As far as the character itself and what they do, I would imagine we'll probably, look at it the same way we look at other Trailblazer paths or not Trailblazer. I did the same thing you did,
I know.
channeling my Star Rail vernacular. Um, but we'll look at the Travelers, Pyro versus Electro versus Anima. We'll look at all of them the same and just be like, they're okay, but there are going to be units that do that job better. You
So,
know,
did you read the constellations on?
I'll be honest, no, because I was willing to get back to the story. So I,
Fair
I
enough.
just I wanted to get back to that. So I could be completely off on this, and it
So
may be, oh my gosh, meta breaking and meta
no,
defining.
no. So I read it. I did read the
Okay.
constellations because they gave it to me and they gave me all 6. I'm like, okay, I want to check it out. I want to see what Pyro Archon is. As far as I can tell, the Pyro Archon exists for that fight. Or sorry, not the Pyro Archon. The Pyro Traveler exists for that fight. Because all of the constellations are, when fighting that specific boss, you get all of these buffs. That's it. Those are all of the constellation. Constellation 1 through Constellation 6 is, when fighting this boss, you get X bonus. So as far as I can tell, Pyro Traveler only exists for that boss fight. And that is the only time that you will ever use that character. And I didn't know if you caught that, but I have thoughts, and I wanted to hear if you had any before I go.
I didn't, but my initial thoughts are just that makes it even worse than I was already kind of thinking it was. Because I mean, as it stands, the Traveler's typically been, it's a good filler. They're serviceable units for whatever that role is that you're trying them to fill, but there are units that do it better. So to hear that, not only are there going to be units that do it better, but there are going to be units that do it the same, like there are units that will do that, but in every content, not just that specific.
Yeah.
So, but to the point when she was thrust upon us, right, and given to us. So, you have all these abilities, right, and she has all these buffs in for the story version of this, right? It's an unlosable battle. You can't die. You run out of health and then boom, instantly you're healed again. So it's like, well, what's the point? What are we really showcasing here if we don't actually get to limit test with the risk of failure? Let it be like you've done in previous domains where you have your party and then you have the 5th character be Mavika, or you have the 5th character in this instance be the Traveler. Why make it a party of 1 or a party of 2? So I didn't really gel with that.
When we fought Shogun, I know I died or I lost to her a number of times when it was just Traveler, and like if you lost, you lost.
Yeah, I mean, like fights that are forcing you to use one character like that, I don't think fit with the whole purpose of combat in Genshin, because it's supposed to be about elements reacting with each other. So just having one unit kind of defeats a lot of the purpose and a lot of the fun of the combat. And so, yeah, if they're going to force us to use it, just give it to us as the 5th character that's temporary while we do this particular section of the quest.
Okay.
But those are kind of my initial thoughts on it. Steve, what about you for the fire or the Pyro Traveler?
So I've probably played a little bit of my hand on it. I actually, so the break in the story where they then pop up the tooltip, I agree. That one it didn't pop off the way that I think they hoped it. I think that considering that the character basically exists solely for that fight, and it might have usage outside of that boss fight, but at this point in time, to my knowledge, that character functionally exists only to fight that boss. You didn't have to let us know that, what the constellations do. Have the image pop up, have it, show that, oh, hey, the entire constellation is unlocked for you, drop us in the fight and go. Her kit isn't that, or play female Traveler. So the kit isn't that complex. E is an enhanced basic attack, enhanced auto attack. It lets you shoot fire from your sword, and then the ultimate is damage, and I think it gives you a slight buff. I don't 100%. But it's basically it's a pure DPS character. Like, there's nothing complex about this kit. Drop us in and let us go. I do think the idea, considering that the Traveler is traditionally kind of Garbo, Like not completely useless, but basically it's going to be, they're probably the first character that you're going to swap on any given team. Like you're going to drop Traveler real fast. Making them a fight specific character is an interesting idea. I'm not gonna lie, I keep on looking over at Honkai Star Rail and Harmony Traveler and the soon to be released Remembrance, not Traveler, Trailblazer. Harmony Trailblazer and Remembrance Trailblazer, and how effective and meta and like useful they are, and kind of look back at Traveler and go, why can't you be like them? Come on, like Trailblazer just keeps on getting better. Traveler, what's wrong with you? Why are you broken? Why do you do this to us? But that's being perhaps a little bit too, considering the different roles that.
Yeah, so I think we both kind of agree. The reveal of Tyro Traveler, it didn't quite have the effect I think that maybe we're like when we see Goku go to like the next level of Super Saiyan for the first time, or when Luffy gets goes to whatever gear for the first time. Like those moments make the events so much more like dramatic, exciting, everything like that, and that just really wasn't the case here. It was kind of a little bit of a miss in that regards. I will be interested to, I think, do the fight, because I imagine it's a weekly boss fight. I would imagine it is. I don't actually know. I just did it, got through the story, and then had to get out. So I was pressed for time for some personal matters. But if it's a weekly boss fight that we can do, I will be interested to see the actual mechanics of it and how difficult it actually is with the party. But if it was just a one-off, only a story-related boss, then it was just kind of ho-hum with the not being able to lose factor. No risk.
Yeah. Sorry. Anyway, I apologize. I completely zoned out there for a second. But do we want to move on, I think, at this point?
Yeah. What was the next thing? Because I think you probably had a list of things you wanted to talk about. Probably at least one or two things to rant about. It wouldn't be a patch review without a rant from you.
True. So I guess my next sort of question for you was, how did you feel about we've already touched on it when we did our review, but how do you feel about the captain wrap up to the story? So just for context for those of you listening who might not play Genshin, and since you're this far in and don't obviously care about spoilers, at the very end, Malvika is supposed to die as part of a deal with the god of death, basically, or a god of death. And instead, the captain, who is a immortal lich, from what we can tell, basically goes, yeah, okay, I'll take that hit for you in order to free the souls of the people that I'm carrying within me in my functionally a phylactery, so that they can all pass on, and then I will be stuck in a state of basically eternal unlife. He's Arthas. He's just Arthas from the Frozen Throne. And that's the plot. But Dave, what are your thoughts on that development?
I was intrigued by the captain, being a harbinger from Snezhnaya, but being kind of one of the first ones that we had goals aligned with, and we worked amicably with to achieve those goals. It kind of opens up, I think, some theory that we threw out a while back, like I think back in maybe season 2 or season 3 maybe, of our discussions, where it's giving credence to Snezhnaya, not the big bad, if we're shifting that paradigm a little bit. The character itself, I liked his design. I thought that was pretty cool. I was wondering when he took off his mask and showed Paimon and the Traveler, it kept, like, the frame was just like cutting off his head, like an adult in Charlie Brown. You just couldn't quite see the face, and I thought they were maybe going to show it and we were going to see something there, but they didn't show his face. But his story arc was intriguing, and then the way they wrapped it up summed it, and it kind of answered a lot of the questions, or all the questions, I guess, regarding him. I was interested in him, but now that his book is closed, I'm interested to see how his relationship with the Traveler and with the quote unquote good guys, how that reflects in the Harbingers we are to meet, and the relationship with Snezhnaya as we move closer to that territory. Because as weird as it is to say, we're getting Snezhnaya this year, aren't we? Like that's a
Yep.
weird thing to think about after all these years of playing Genshin. Like we're finally about to get to Genshin or to Snezhnaya, and it's this year.
That's the way it's looking, at least based off of the end talk with Malvika. That seems to be the direction they're pointing us to.
Like we have an or another area that we're going to go to, or a rod or something like that.
Yeah,
Uh,
some meteor or something
Um,
fell there, if I remember correctly.
which is out, like it's just on the way to Snezhnaya, or it's just outside Snezhnaya. So it's like, this is going to be that little pit stop right before the next, main. It's probably similar to what the chasm was, and what Enkai Noimiya was. It's like this zone that we're gonna explore while we wait for Snezhnaya to appear right around the corner.
Okay. Yeah, I know for me the problem is I get caught up on little stupid stuff. So, having the captain take Malvika's death, as it were, like, jumping on that particular grenade, more just left me confused because, like, at that point, all Malvika really had to do was, like, haul a dino up a mountain and then go, okay, I'm going to just sacrifice this dino to you. Or, like,
Well,
they
I
don't.
think there had to be a law of equivalent exchange a little bit. Was the
Okay, so
implication I
two
thought.
dinos, but there's still a certain amount of like, this isn't. I guess part of my problem with the story overall in Natlan is it all felt very loosey goosey. The stakes never were quite solidified in a meaningful way for me, especially because there's a lot of proper noun problems of the ley lines and okay, wait, are the ley lines the memories of people? But they're not. They're actually basically the river Styx, where it's like where the dead actually go. Like it's not just the memories of stuff, it's life stream from Final Fantasy VII. So okay, fine. That means that when we do leyline challenges for gold, or sorry, for Mora and for XP books, we're functionally killing souls of stuff. Like we're reanimating stuff this way we can kill it again. I don't know, that it's weird. It was just there's a lot of loosey goosey concepts that I don't feel they sat down and really gave me a once over through in a solid enough manner for me to be understanding the full stakes of what all was going. And I feel like that Malvika finale kind of was the penultimate version of that, where it's like, oh well, she's gonna die, and it's okay, but there's no time limit on this. Like she just has to die at some point. She's already mortal. She's going to die at some point. Like you even explicitly say that like the method of her death is up to her. Like she can choose how it is. And it's like, well, she's already mortal. She's not a immortal goddess in the same way that the other Archons are. This isn't Nahida or Farina or Shogun who are giving up pure immortality. This is just like a human woman who in 50 years is going to be dead anyways. Okay. I don't know. Like it felt like the stakes were all a little bit all over the place, but that's just me.
Yeah, I mean, true, but I guess the implication always is that because in Natlan it's like when people die, it's through the Ode of Resurrection, they come back and they're reborn, their soul is reborn again, and I guess the implication is here that would not be the case because she would be having to sustain,
Would it?
with her.
I don't
That
know.
that's what I got.
That was not what I picked up on at all. I basically got
Oh,
like that because even with the Ode of Resurrection, it's one where that was so vague. I'm like, wait a minute, they have an infinite respawner? Like, how does that work? That's completely unclear. You have people going off to just basically kamikaze into the abyss and then getting summoned back from the dead? Like, that seems like that's a big weird concept to throw into the middle of a war story. Because then why wouldn't you just bring back Chaska's sister? Like, You could just bring people back. There's no, again, it devalues the stakes so much. I don't know.
I think I believe I can't believe that there would be a loophole like that that's just not explained. So I'm sure there's something that we're missing or that we missed that explains why they can't bring those back. But the vibe I was getting was that she is going off to sacrifice herself to basically be the battery for
Made
this thing,
sense.
and so therefore she wouldn't respawn, as it were.
Okay, I mean, I understood that she was going to sacrifice herself in order to basically stabilize the ley lines of Natlan, which were all funky, because of the abyss and so forth. Like that, I understood that part of the story. It was just, again, regardless, I don't like the way, I'm going to be blunt, I don't like the way the Natlan story was set up. I don't think they did a very good war story. And I apologize, I guess I'm going to get on my box here. So this is Steven Yells at Clouds.
Yes.
But, all the other regional stories were built around what the god was. So, the starter zone, God of Freedom, it's about freedom. The harbor, I can't believe I completely blanked on that city's name. Liyue. Yeah, Liyue. Liyue Harbor, god of contracts. It's entirely about contracts and deals and so on and so forth. Inazuma, she is the god of, I believe, eternity. So it's about the concept of eternity, stasis, etc., etc. Sumeru, god of knowledge. It's about the entire setup is about knowledge and so on and so forth. Fontaine, god of justice. We have an entire plot where we bring a serial killer to justice and what is just in a larger sense. And then we get to Natlan, and it's about war. And I don't feel like it was about war. Like, it didn't do a very good job of being a war story. Like, it didn't say anything. It didn't really do anything. It had a really nice middle section where you got to kind of fight a war. But that was it. Like, it didn't do anything with that larger concept, I feel like. I don't know. Like, did you get that sort of same feeling, or am I just crazy?
I mean, when you phrase it, when you put it like that, I can see where you're coming from, but because it's framed in the war aspect that we're fighting against the abyss, and it's been this constant struggle, this constant war, and then we kind of bring it to a close through our actions and the events, so that they don't have to keep repeating this for all of history. I like you said, with us seeing how they ultimately ended it, there's, we can always go back and, say, oh, this is what they could have done or should have done, or this would have been better, because it's easy to do that. But I think ultimately, as far as a story arc, it was just kind of an anticlimactic ending. And the way they went with it was the most predictable path. So I mean, I hope we don't invest all this time and like Snezhnaya takes a similar turn. I hope we can kind of get back to Sumeru, Fontaine, levels of story. I could maybe go similar to you. I didn't love being locked down in the prison and have to do that during the Fontaine quests, but the story around it was fine and well and good and stuff like that.
Yeah, and hey, the next goddess is the goddess of love, so that they at least hopefully can do something interesting with that. But I don't know. It's not. I don't think either of us are dropping Genshin, by any means because of this. This isn't we're walking away. I will say that Natlan in general has lost some of my interest, so I don't think that I'm going to be necessarily as super excited for stuff as far as Natlan is concerned. But as soon as we see Snezhnaya, I'm probably going to be right back in. I'm going to probably be right back. So
yeah, I think the story was ultimately a miss for me. I'm not gonna sit here and be like, drop the game. Like that would be a huge overreaction if that was the intention. Because again, to be in service for 3-4 years, and pumping out content, side stories and event stories, and then these Archon quests, like not everyone's going to be an absolute banger. Like you're going to have some misses here and there. That's fine. They've built a world and done well enough on other things. Like, okay, you missed. Just please don't let the conclusion be also be a miss, to these story arcs. So,
So I do have one last thing that I want to do
yeah,
before we wrap up. Those of you who have, again, been longtime listeners might remember that in episode 30, we did some speculation as to what Natlan's story would be. And I pulled out some bullet points from that discussion, and just wanted to really quickly go over them with you, Dave, and kind of see how right or how wrong we were going into it. So if you're game, I'm going to dig right in. So the first was... the first point of speculation we had was that the area of Natlan was going to be focused on a sport or tournament arc instead of an actual war. Obviously, we were wrong on that one. The second,
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So where we were wrong on that, yeah, obviously it did focus on the war as a whole during the introductory parts. Where things were like to choose the champions to go into the war. That was the game aspect. So on a very small initial scale, we freaked, but yeah, in the grand macro, wrong, because it definitely was more on the war itself. Yes.
Yeah, because the exact quote was basically the region would be focused on a tournament of some assortment, maybe Pokemon Battle, whatever, that would serve as a metaphor for the concept of war instead of an actual ongoing war. But anyways, the second prediction that we had was that Shneznaya was going to get the Gnosis. We thought that was a slam dunk. Like, they've gotten everyone before it. We were wrong on that one, too. Malvika still has her Gnosis at this point, so we might... That still could potentially...
Yeah, this counts as a where Brohoyo was wrong for now, but as we get closer to Shneznaya, does not say she won't turn it over.
Yeah, she could lose it in the future, but at least as of the end of this Archon Quest, which traditionally this would be basically the end of the story.
Yeah, we're taking the L where Brohoyo was wrong.
Yeah,
but subject to change before Shneznaya.
Yeah, we also thought that the big reveal was going to be that Gnosis are inherently corrupting. That was not the big reveal. That doesn't mean that it couldn't be true, just that was not the reveal of this Archon Quest.
Yeah, where Brohoyo was not proven correct. Inconclusive.
Yeah. And then the final one was that it was going to be a Fatui-focused story, that the story of Natlan would focus more on the Fatui than other potential enemy groups. I'll give us a 50-50 on that one, because while the Abyss were the main enemies, this was also a fairly Fatui-heavy story with the captain and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I'd say for that last point, I'll give us a little bit more credit for where Brohoyo was right, and with the captain being a major player in the main part of the story, you can make a case. Sure, there were some the different tribal quests, that you go through for the reputation stuff. Doesn't focus on the Fatui per se, but for the major overarching quest here, the captain played a major part, almost, right alongside Malvika, almost in terms of importance, for the story. So I'd give us a right on that as well. Were there any other things that you pulled from that we need to give ourselves credit for or hold ourselves accountable for?
Those are the four major points. There were a couple of minor things, but nothing too crazy overall. So I think that's a fair standard to hold ourselves.
Look, when we get our takes right, we're going to, of course, gloat about it and let you know and let that hubris flow. But at the same time, on the flip side, when we're wrong, we're going to admit that we're wrong. We got to hold ourselves accountable on that. So I know we've had a few takes in the past. I know I've been wrong on, and some of our listeners have pointed out to me a few things. I'm always willing to learn and admit those. But when we're right, let's take credit for those too. Now, this week, we don't have any new characters to review, but we do have some events going on, so I want to jump into those next, and then we'll get into our other gotcha news and notes. So this week, we're looking at one event going on in Genshin Impact, I believe, and for more on that, Steve, I'll throw it to you. What are we looking at this week for events?
So the only event that will be live as of when this goes live is Emblem of Steadfast Valor. It is basically a free-running platforming event in Genshin. You run around, collect coins on a track, and if you complete in the time period / get enough coins, you get primos and other materials and so on and so forth. Fairly bog standard, nothing super crazy as far as the event goes. But that's basically it as far as events in, at least between Genshin and Honkai Star Rail. There should be 3.0 dropping this week, but seeing as how that's not going to be live when this goes live, that's not being covered.
We'll be covering 3.0 in the future in similar fashion to what we've done in the past. But moving to other gacha news outside of the Hoyoverse realm, I did want to take a quick moment to reference a few things. One, we had Tower of Fantasy version 4.6. Their trailer dropped here recently, so getting ready for the 4.6 version. If you are still playing that or enjoying Tower of Fantasy or looking at trying that out, that was going to be, if you're unfamiliar, Tower of Fantasy is an action RPG, but was more, I think it was more in line with like an MMO style than Genshin was. It's not necessarily like a true MMO per se, but it has more MMO elements than Genshin does. So if you're interested and are looking for something else to try out, version 4.6 is getting ready to drop here with the trailer coming out recently. Another game that popped up here I wanted to talk about because we had in our off-banner episodes, we talked about the anime Frieren. And so it popped up on my radar when Guardian Tales is doing a collaboration with Frieren. And while I tried Guardian Tales at launch and hadn't really touched it since. Steve, I didn't know if this was a game you had tried in the past or if you were a fan enough of Frieren to give it a download and try it again.
I'm gonna be honest. I don't remember having tried this in the past. I might download it and realize I have an account, but it's not one that sticks in the memory. I think I mentioned earlier in our collab episode that typically collabs aren't necessarily really often enough for me to try out a game. I do like Frieren. Sure, I like it enough to try and pick up an entire game for just a single collab. But right. I might try it out. I make no promises.
Fair enough. For Guardian Tales, I believe this one was kind of, I think it had Legend of Zelda linked to the past fives in terms of the art and camera angles and styles, with puzzles and combat type, and then just gacha thrown in. I believe, unless I'm confusing that with something else, but I believe that is the case. Other news, there were two beta tests that have started here recently. We mentioned them in the past, or at least we mentioned Arknight's Enfeld in the past. That beta has started, so if you did get into that beta and you were one of the fortunate ones to do that, be sure to let us know how that experience is going. I'd love to hear how that compares to Genshin or to Wuthering Waves or any of those other open world action games that we have. And the other game that beta just launched was Etheria Restart, which this looks like another similar playstyle turn-based strategy, so like Honkai Star Rail in that regards. So also, if you were a fortunate one able to get into that beta, let us know how your experience is going with that one. Last thing I wanted to touch on was for Girls Frontline 2 Exilium. They just announced their next banner after this Macchiato and Tololo dual banners. The next banner is going to be Diane, will be the next one to come out. She is good utility. I believe she's a buffer stripper, so she takes buffs off of allies if memory serves. For me, as far as my understanding from where the Chinese servers are with their meta, and as far as like the banners that we have just had with Suomi, me pulling for Suomi and then me pulling for Macchiato, Diane's probably going to be a skip for me personally, but she does have some utility if you didn't go in on Suomi or you're not going to go in on Macchiato. But as for me, I'll be recharging and saving up pull currency for a few other banners that I know will be coming down the road of characters that I'm interested in. And that's the beauty of, I guess, the Chinese servers being about a year ahead of us. The other thing with Girls Frontline 2, on top of the all the various events that are going on right now, we of course have the big event, the Macchiato event happening currently, but we also have some daily missions that you can do to get some extra premium currency and growth materials. You have the daily login twice a day to get 60 energy, or the equivalent of 60 energy for both times, so 120 energy throughout the day, which is kind of nice. But the other thing that's supposed to be coming in February is going to be the standard banner focus. So basically, you can choose which of the legendary or 5-star weapons or units that you would want to focus on, so that when you ultimately hit the 5-star unit, you have a higher chance of getting this particular one, as opposed to just getting an equal chance of any random number of those units. And then I did also want to clarify with that, because I believe there was some misunderstandings going on in different online communities for this feature. For this feature to enable, you do not have to have pulled the 100 or the 260 times on the standard banner to get the selector. This is just, once the feature is enacted, you will be able to enable the focus, even if you haven't done the pulls required to get the selector. Some people were under that impression, but looking at screenshots from the Chinese servers, they're showing that we haven't done 260 pulls on a banner, but we're still able to select our focus. So I did want to clear that up for those that were confused about that. But again, that feature, not officially announced date yet in the global servers, but it is expected to be coming in February. But that's going to wrap it up for us this week. We do want to thank you guys for joining us. Be sure to let us know your thoughts on the 5.3 Archon quests and maybe your speculations on the future story as we get closer and closer to Shineznaya. Maybe you guys shared some sentiments that we brought up today. Maybe you completely disagree with us, but let us know down in the comments below. If you did enjoy the episode and you'd like to show your support, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the channel. You can always email us at brohoyopod@gmail.com with questions or suggestions for the show. We also have a link to our Discord in the description, so be sure to join us over there for news, game nights, and content notifications, or most recently, the best 10 poll I've ever had in my gacha gaming community. So join us next week, though, when we discuss the different approaches that developers take to a game's live stream event. But until then, keep gaming.
We made a choice, go fight against your fate.